Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am in Newberg, Oregon, in the Willamette Valley with Scott Flora of Native Flora Winery. Scott, welcome, and tell us about Native Flora.
Well, welcome here. Native Flora is a very small, kind of high-end boutique winery. We're pretty reclusive, not because we don't like people, but we just don't make very much wine. We're pretty much word of mouth. You won't find our wines on store shelves anywhere. Basically, come and see us if you want the wine, and we have a massive wine club that pulls from us. We make excellent quality wines. We have a lot of fun doing it. We stay away from conventions as much as possible. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Oh, so simple. So we're sitting here in your home, which is also the winery where the property is. Can you tell us a little bit how many acres you have, how many acres planted?
So the total estate is about 33 acres right now. We have 17 under vine with about room for 4 more to go in. And there's some great debates going on about what to put in there because I'll be planting some more Malbec, which you can't grow here.
That sounds like a really smart choice.
Some Chenin Blanc for sure. Maybe a little bit of Riesling, and then I'm also looking at Fruliano.
Wow. So that's what you're looking to plant here. What do you currently have planted here?
So right now we've got Pinot Blanc. We have 9 different varieties of Pinot Noir. We've got a touch of Syrah and a touch of Malbec already growing.
And you have a very special little wine.
And we have a special little grape that we call Pinot Gouge. It's named after Henri Gouge, who had founded Gouge Wineries, or the Gouge family wineries over in Burgundy. And it's a mutant variety of Pinot Noir that switched from black to white back in 1936. It's a fabulous wine.
Yes, we're sipping it right now. So, and what's your total case production?
Tiny. We'll do between 1,850 and 2,000 cases this year.
Okay. Now, I know you said that you have to come here to get the wine, and you probably ship and have a wine club, but your wines are available in a few markets. What markets are those?
The only markets that you'll find us are Dallas and Houston, and strictly at restaurants of a certain caliber, let's say. Okay. So Dallas is by far our most prevalent market. Houston's probably number 2. And then, of course, there's Willamette Valley wineries around and restaurants around that'll have us floating a bit, too. So.
But wine's worth seeking out, and I think people will start to understand when they hear your story. So getting into you as a wine drinker, what's your first memory relevant to wine?
So I grew up about 25 minutes outside of Napa, old Italian family, Northeast Bay area. And first memories are people coming over, wines coming out, everybody having fun. And so my fundamental association with wine will and always has been fun. And we try and keep it that way. But you start as a child, very European model. You have like a tall shot glass. And when you're really small, you get 1 finger. And sometimes it's watered down, so you start to learn to taste. And as you get a little older, you get 2 fingers. And when mom's having a really bad day, you might get a whole hand.
So once you were drinking a whole hand's worth of wine, you obviously have had the privilege to taste a lot of great wines. And I know you've traveled the world. Is there one memorable wine that stands out as sort of one of those aha moments for you?
There have been a lot of those moments when I stop and think about it. Probably the first one would be back in probably the mid-1980s at Livingston Moffett Winery in California, which no longer exists. Diane and Jim sold it a number of years ago. In their kitchen, Randy Dunn was their very first winemaker, and we were tasting a cab from their vineyard, and I think it was Stanley's Blend, if I remember. I mean, it's kind of pushing my memory. We're talking 45 years ago. And it was fabulous. It was one of those things where you take a sip, and you're almost stunned by everything that's going on in your mouth and the complexity and what you're feeling and all the different flavors that are evoked. And it was, there have been a number of those moments. So that's probably the very first one.
You've spent some time traveling around the world. Is there a particular region that, you feel is one of the highlights?
Well, obviously, France is always fun. But I tend to, we took a trip 4 years ago where we did Spain and Portugal. And we didn't go north. We didn't go up to the Douro. We didn't go up to Rioja. We stayed south. And the fun part is sometimes just digging out wines that you can't find any other place. And so when we were down in Jumilla, on the southeast side of Spain, there were some fabulous wines down there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like finding us. Is you find somebody local who knows wine, you start talking to them, you start saying, okay, so what do I need to know about? And that's how you find the good stuff.
Absolutely. So traveling the world, who do you think drinks the best in terms of quality?
It's either the French, the Italians, or us.
Or maybe all of us. So if we were to come, well, we're here in your home and winery, so your cellar is somewhere around here, downstairs, I heard. What would we find in there in addition to your own wines?
Oh, cosmopolitan, all across the board. So you'll have every continent represented. You'll have, I've got a French section, I've got a Spanish section, I've got an Italian section, I've got South African wines, we've got a little bit of Eastern European stuff floating around, we've got a few Aussies, some New Zealand. It's pretty cosmopolitan. I've been collecting wine for 40 years now.
Wow. So is there anything in there that you drank lately that was drinking really well?
What did we just have? Yeah, we just opened a Ladera 2003 Lone Canyon cab. Spectacular.
Wow. So, God, you're so good at this. Like, you have like a retail shop downstairs. I want to go shopping. So, drinking wines from around the world and, you're focused on Pinot and other grapes, but obviously we're in a region here. That specializes in a grape. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
No. That's a really simple question. There's no such thing as a perfect variety. I think that most varietals have their own characteristics, their own history, their own place in the wine world. And I think that you're naive to gravitate to just one. I started with Big Reds in California. I was raised on like Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, and Cabernet. And then you gravitate to Bordeaux. From Bordeaux, I gravitated to Burgundy. That's where I first fell in love with Pinot as a grape. But that's not the end of the world. It's just, if you drink Pinot all the time, you get burnt out on it. I'm sorry. Once in a while, opening up the big cab, it's kind of like a mallet to the forehead the first time you take a sip. It's awesome. It's just fun.
So what's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
Oh, there's a loaded question. Well, it's easy to answer, actually. Our highest score that we've ever attained is 0.
Because you don't submit them.
We don't like to submit wines. We don't submit wines for scores. We will compete nationally, internationally on double-blind competitions, which I think is, I don't care if it's a gold, a silver, a bronze. I mean, we actually submitted 19 wines in competition last year. We took 19 medals across 6 or 7 different competitions that we were in, from New York to California. And to me, it's not, is it bronze, is it gold, is it silver? It's really about what's the overall quality of the wine that you're producing and how does it stack up against your peer group at that point in time. The critics piece, to me, I find it highly subjective. I like competitions because they tend to be blind or double-blind competitions. And I don't want whoever's tasting the wine and evaluating the wine to have any notion of where it was produced, what it came from, who it is. And wine critics and magazines don't work that way, as you know.
So do you think there's any value to them?
Sure. I think it's great for consumers who want to replicate somebody else's palate.
Okay. That is a quotable line there. I'm going to remember that. So as a wine drinker, getting down to wine for you, red, white, or rosé?
Yes.
Still or sparkling?
Yes.
Champagne or domestic?
Yes.
I know not to push you on anything like that, because with the retail store you have down in your cellar, you would never be locked into one thing.
No, it's fun. I think that probably the greatest part about wine, when you really dig into it, is the diversity that you can find around the planet. And we've made sparkling for a dozen years now. And it's really fun to go head-to-head with a Veuve or something like that at a table with 7 or 8 people who really know wine. It's just, they're different and they're both good. There's not, one of the problems I have with like the 95, 96, 97, 98 or a perfect 100, there is no perfect 100. There are great wines and there are good wines. And then there are wines you shouldn't even look at.
So with the diversity of wines that you like to drink and all the different styles in the regions of the world and the varieties, how do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you think there are rules to follow? I mean, I know you're sort of the anti-rule guy, but what do you look for when you're pairing food and wine? And what tips would you offer people?
I think probably the biggest key is, and I'm kind of an acid fiend, and so I love wines that have a higher acid profile, and largely because I like foods. And so if you're eating fattier, heavier foods, I love something that's got a really nice acid line to it, because it's almost like a tennis match, where you're taking a bite of food and you're getting that lush, fatty kind of just, I don't know how to describe it in great words, but it's just, there's a luxury to it that's great. And then you take a sip of something that's got a nice cutting edge to it and its own beautiful flavors, and it's like it cleans the slate, and then you go back to it. So from a rule standpoint, absolutely not. We just did a wine dinner down at Bob's in Dallas, and we did Pinot and steak. And
Pinot and steak?
I know, it's unheard of. Texas has got to wake up. We're working on them. One consumer at a time. But we did it. We make some Pinots that have tremendous depth and complexity. They're not the light, airy things that everyone conceives of them are. They're really made. They're more like a Romanée Saint Vivant, if you wanted to talk about a region in Burgundy. Not so much Conti, but a little bit farther south from there. And when you pair those with these, the cuts of meat that we had at this dinner, some of the best steak I've ever eaten in my life. And having them paired with a slightly higher acid Pinot that still has its own weight and depth and complexity, the audience was blown away. It was really fun.
You're making me hungry. So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure to taste your wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
Something different, as much as anything else. I think that when you put us in a blind tasting of, say, Oregon Pinot producers, we stick out. We're kind of, because of where we're located, and we haven't even talked about this, but we're literally on the wrong side of the hill. We're on north-facing slopes where you technically can't grow grapes. We came up here in 2005, largely on the premise that there was some badly missed science, and it's proven true. So we have 2 blocks that we produce a wine called the Heretic from, which, if you do it a blind tasting with a Saint Vivant, you couldn't tell them apart. It's really fun.
Ooh, let's do that.
I've got to think about who I've got in the cellar. And so when we moved up here and we started growing grapes on the wrong side of the hill, everyone thought we were crazy, but the wines we produce are, I think, unique. And they're not unique in that they're so far afield that you wouldn't understand their Pinot. They're always picked out as Pinot. We poured at the Young Sommeliers National Finals a few years ago, and it was fun to watch the 9 finalists from across the country break into 3 camps. One camp saying, we have no idea where this wine comes from, and another camp saying, it's got to be, what did they say, Nuit Saint-Georges, and the other group was saying Volnay. And watching this argument go and knowing that none of them have got it right, and it's because of our unique location.
Wow. Fascinating. So we're sitting here surrounded by your vineyards. You've got glass windows, so I can see vineyards all around me. It's a little foggy. The fog is sitting down, so it's also a little hazy. It's that perfect scenario for aliens to land on your property. And if they were to arrive, which of your wines would you want to present to them?
It depends whether they like northern alien varietals or southern alien varietals. Aliens landing. What would I pour for them? I'd probably pour something middle of the road. I'd probably pour one of our Time Series wines, probably like a 2014, something that's kind of a classic vintage. It's representative of what we can do, and I think it shows very nicely. It's not an extreme one way or the other.
When you say Time Series wines, what do you mean by that?
So we have, as I said, we've got 9 different varietals of Pinot that we grow here. We use some for making very specific clonal blends, and this is the beauty of Pinot. Pinot has got these secret love affairs, and our job as winemakers is to discover these, because certain types of Pinot hate each other, and when you blend them together, it's like a fight in the glass, and other Pinots adore each other. So we make one wine called Jaguar, which is a blend of 828, which is one of the rare Dijon clones you don't find around, and Wädenswil, which is one of the Swiss clones. And those two, they adore each other. So every year, that's Jaguar. The Time Series is actually a compendium of everything we grow. And so part of what you have to understand about the vineyard is that we have a vineyard that has a 300-foot elevation change, top to bottom. We have 7 different soil types on property. We have 3 microclimates. We have all of these variations going on in everything that we grow. And so the vineyard actually produces this like cosmopolitan sampling of what Pinot can be. And for the time series, we take a little bit of everything and it goes into that time blend. And the wines all carry the name time in them. So it could be next time or press for time or serving time or jail time. There's all these time series wines. But what it's become is this vintage tool, because we've taken so much of the variability out of it from a soil standpoint or a clonal standpoint or an elevation standpoint or a climate standpoint, that we've got this huge cross-section of grapes that go into the time series. The last variable is the year. And so when we do a vertical tasting out of the time series, it's fabulous to watch. We took about 50 people through a 6-year vertical this summer, and we started at 16 and worked our way back to 11. And I always like to talk about vintages in terms of one-word nomenclature, rather than talk about, shades of celery root and things like that, which drive me crazy. I think about vintages in one-word terms because it's easier for people to comprehend what you're talking about. So 16 for me was a classic. 15 is opulent. 14 is reserved, or elegant actually. 13 is the reserved year. 12 slutty, and 11 is austere. And as we walked 50 people through these 6 different years, you could literally see the light bulbs going off in people's heads because all the variability is gone. It's just, what did the year give you that year? And so from that standpoint, it's a fabulous tool.
Wow. Well, yeah, so I normally, ask a question about vintage variation, and you've clearly demonstrated that through the one word to describe each of these years. Are there any signs or omens or predictors that you look for that will help you determine what a year is going to bring you?
That's a great question. So this year was actually one of those, you can puff up on that one. For those of you who can't see, she's being all proud of herself. So part of it is you can use science, and I'm a hardcore science person, but there's also this thing called intuition. So this year was 2019, not this year, we're in 2020, but last year, 2019, the whole summer was just absolutely fabulous. We had a slower start. We had only 5 or 6 days above 90 degrees. We had moderate little bits of rainfall throughout the summer, so there wasn't a lot of hydration issues going on with the vines. It was setting up to be this magnificent harvest. And then somewhere around the end of August, I started noticing things like geese going south already, and maple trees were already switching color, and the vines were starting to lignify and harden off early. And they shouldn't be doing that for at least 3 or 4 more weeks. And all summer long, it had reminded me of 2013, which was our monsoon harvest. So on September 5th, I had the vineyard crew go out, and we actually sprayed a botryticide as a protection against developing botrytis in a wet season. And the forecast was nothing but sunny weather. And that day, Greg Jones, the renowned climatologist, came up, and he arrived as we were finishing spraying. He goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "A botryticide." And he looked at me like I'd lost my mind, which is not uncommon. And he says, "Why?" I said, "It's just my bones." I said, "I've got this funny feeling. It's reminding me of 13. I'm going to hedge my bets." I said, "Probably cost me $1,000 to do the spray." I said, "Just let it go. We'll see what happens." And he says, "No," he says, "we've got this little rain event coming over the weekend." He says, "I don't even expect the ground to get dry, wet everywhere." And he says, "And then it looks like clear sailing for 2 weeks." And I was like, "God, I hope you're right." So we got about 3 inches of rain that weekend. I sent him a note on Monday on email. I said, "Nice call." And he wrote back and said, "One of the worst calls of my life." And unfortunately, we had set up for this amazing, perfect harvest. I was so excited about 19, but it's like someone flipped the switch on September 7th, and we went from these really kind of mild, sunny, wonderful days to overcast, cloudy, cold, wet, and the fruit didn't hold up. It was a tough harvest. Had I not done that spray back on September 5th, it would have been a huge, huge issue. Yeah. And as it was, we actually came in very clean, but it wasn't, you're always kind of praying and hoping for this magnificent harvest. And I thought we had it nailed, and then Mother Nature throws the switch on you. And so it's farming.
Wow. And so also, as much as there's variation from vintage to vintage, there are some similarities that happen. I mean, you related this to another vintage and saw sort of a pattern. I mean,
it is, and that was nothing more than a hunch. It was kind of the natural indicators of geese and leaves and lignification, a typhoon blowing up into Japan at the wrong time of year. I mean, all these crazy things that you have to pay attention to. And it came true that year. Now, next year, I could be 100 miles off base. I just happened to get it right this last year.
Wow. So, I mean, obviously, you've lived on this property for how long?
We started this in 2005, so we've been up here 15 years.
And you live among your vines, so you're very intimate, I'm sure, with your vines, walking in the vines in the vineyard on a regular basis?
Yeah, daily. I mean, well, I think that you're touching on an issue that is near and dear to my heart, and that is 90% of winemaking and quality wine is in the vineyard. Do you know Frank Altamira? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Frank, 35 years ago, we were tasting through, I think it was the 82 vintage, or one of the bad California vintages, that the pundits had all been dissing on and just totally was flailing. And we were tasting through barrels, and his wines were stunning. And if you know Frank, he's not got a lot of words sometimes. And I've never seen him in everything but bib overalls in my entire life. And I looked at him and said, these wines are stunning. This is supposed to be a crappy vintage. How do you do it? And he just flipped his head to the side, nodding towards the outside. And I said, well, what the hell does that mean? And he says, it's outside. He said, if you get the grapes right, he goes, a monkey can ferment them. And it's one of my favorite quotes.
Well, so on that note, you walk through your vineyards, and I know you're a little contrary to, certain philosophies and ideas out there, but do you talk to your vines? Have you been known to speak to your grapes and express to them, or do they talk to you?
I was going to say, I don't talk to the grapes. I might listen to them, but I would never talk to them. No, I think that you spend a lot of time in the vineyard. They do kind of talk to you. You can take a look at color. You can take a look at the amount of shoot growth you got. You can take a look at tendril health. And I will nibble on vines as I'm going through, and I'll bite into leaves and I'll bite into tendrils. And you can kind of taste and feel what's going on in the vineyard as much as anything. But we have, it is fairly unconventional. We've got a trellising system that nobody else uses because, we keep sheep in the vineyard 365 days a year. And so we have to have a trellising system that accommodates them because they love grapes, contrary to popular opinion, and I won't poison my sheep in order to keep them adverse to grape leaves. So we just kind of work around it. That's an inside joke, by the way, folks.
So not to get too technical, and obviously we don't have a visual here, but when you talk about trellising, what are you doing in a general sense that's different? Just making them grow taller so that the sheep can't reach them?
Two things. We have a different wire system that we use, but yes, our fruiting wire is actually established on the reach for our tallest sheep. And so our ram can reach up about 40 inches high. It's a small breed. They're Southdown baby dolls. Heavy in stature, low at the shoulder. They're not able to stand up on their hind legs easily. They're kind of like this they look like little woolly Sherman tanks running around the vineyard. And so our fruiting wire is set at 42 inches, 2 inches above his reach. Which when you get ground moving and stuff from terracing and things like that, you can cause yourself some problems. We do suffer from a little bit of sheep blight here and there, so we're the only vineyard that has that disease. And we prune in a different style too. So we started spur pruning years ago, which doesn't work in Oregon, but I think it works fabulously. Did it? Well, we were very empirical about it when we started doing spur pruning. The whole premise was someone said you can't do it in Oregon, which is usually my highest motivator to try it. So we actually took 4 rows in 5 different blocks of grapes, 5 different clones, and spur pruned, which as opposed to basically tearing out the entire canopy at the start of the season and laying down 2 new canes that will then produce the fruiting canes for the coming year. You're almost doing like a cordon system where you're leaving the existing arm in place and you're pruning off on spurs and letting the spurs set 2 shoots instead of 1. And so we did this in 5 different blocks, 4 rows each, harvested the fruit separately, ran the chemistry on the juice separately, and there was a pronounced trend across all 5 samples that was uniform. And it was something that I liked. And I said, so 1 year proves nothing. So the next year we took half of each of those blocks and did the same experiment and the same trial and got the same result. And it helped in a number of ways, both from a mineral standpoint and an acid preservation standpoint that I actually liked from a grape must standpoint, from a fermentation starting point. And so we switched the entire vineyard over to spur pruning. I think we're probably the only vineyard in the state that's spur pruned. And now lots of other people have just in the last 3 or 4 years, I hear people starting to talk about it and starting to do it. And we've got spur arms out there that are 5-6 years old now. So it's fun. I think one of the differences it gives you, and there's no empirical way I think you can test this, is that when you're standard cane prune, you typically will have a shoot carrying 2 clusters. Whereas when you're spur pruned, you'll have double the number of shoots, and we try and carry 1 cluster per shoot. And so what happens is each little cluster has its own food source from a leaf standpoint. And so I think that you get a better balance across the entire vineyard too.
Yeah, that's fascinating. In the time that you've been here and it's a family business, have you established any sort of traditions or things that you do at the start of harvest as a team? Any sort of, I don't know, like good luck rituals, personal or team-wise?
That's an easy answer. No.
Because you don't believe in that stuff.
No, I don't. Sorry. It's not a voodoo vineyard.
Yeah, but even if it's not voodoo, maybe there are things you just happen to do, like you stop shaving for the whole of harvest, or you open up a great bottle of wine the night before you start. I don't know. That's the kind of...
Oh, those kind of things. Yeah. Well, on that front, no.
So when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I'm trying to remember. That was a long time ago. What did I want to be when I grew up? I think initially I wanted to be actually a doctor. The medical field. So one of my degrees is biology with the intent of going on to med school. But when I got out of school, or as I was graduating, I kind of looked at what the industry was doing and where the AMA was at. And I said, I'm going to go the other way. And so I went into business. And it was probably a really good decision in hindsight.
And so you were in the business world. What sort of triggered you into the wine world?
Oh, that was from youth. I started collecting wines when I was 18. Legal drinking age back then was still 18. And I started buying and collecting wines back then.
And what brought you to buying a vineyard in Oregon then, as a California boy?
Insanity. No, actually the decision to come to Oregon had nothing to do with wine, in all honesty. We were living in Hong Kong, had been abroad for about 3.5 years. Kids needed to come home. They were starting to speak British English and Chinese euphemisms, and so we needed to teach them a little about being an ugly American. And really it was where in the States did we want to live? My wife had associations and friends and a couple of relatives in Oregon. I've been coming up here since I was a tiny boy, a baby essentially. And so I knew the area well. And it was really a choice about where do we want to live, raise our kids, the community that we wanted to be part of. And it was a great move from that standpoint. I had not, because I've been abroad for so many years, I hadn't paid attention to Oregon's wine development. And as soon as we got on the ground and we got kind of a little bit of settled, of course I snuck out into wine country to go see what was going on. And I was hitting wines that I thought were fabulous. They were different than Burgundies, but they were equally good. And I think that's really where the whole kind of interest in doing this came from. And then, of course, I spent an entire career fixing broken businesses or starting new things. And you develop this very contrarian way of thinking. And so as I started to think about, well, if I were going to start a vineyard, what would I do differently? And that's where this notion for being on the wrong side of the hill, predicated on science, came from. And so we started.
So, Mr. Contrary, what do you do when you're not being contrary? What else do you do what do you do in your free time? What other contrary things do you do?
God, I think one of the things that you underestimate about owning a vineyard and a small winery is there is no free time. It isn't. It's just the list of things to do is growing exponentially faster than our ability to do them, which is kind of a fun problem. You get to your 60s and you go, okay, how many more years do I have? And I figure, based on like my mom's genetics, I've got at least 20. But It's just how it's kind of picking what do you want to do, how do you want to do it, what type of life do you want to have as you get there, how do you find time to step down and relax. I love the fact that you're here in the slow season. I mean, this is January 9th, it's dead. We love it being dead right now. We're still selling a bunch of wine, but it's all just repeat orders from customers coming in and things like that. And it gives us the time to kind of work around here, do a bunch of projects, rescue koi, which I was doing last week.
Really?
And, yeah, we had to do a koi rescue. Someone was closing their pond down and had large koi, and we have this monstrous koi pond up here. And so they called and said, could you home some of our big fish? And I said, sure. So I had to do the koi transfer and then the isolation and the quarantine and all that stuff. So yeah, those things.
That's how you keep your free time. Okay, I get it. So I know your kids are older, grown in college and such. So when you're planning a romantic evening for you and your wife, what kind of wines get pulled out? What sets a romantic tone for you guys?
Where's my wife when I need her?
She picks the wines?
I'm just trying to think about that. I don't know that there's well, let's go back to kind of the premise of wine itself. People they'll come down to our personal cellar sometimes. Actually, we had it set up at the other house and it was in full bloom. People would come down, we'd walk in and they'd be like, oh my God, how many kinds of wine are there? And I'd say 2. And they say, 2? What'd they go, red and white? I said, no. Wines I like and wines I don't like. And that's really the way wine works for me. Uh-huh. So when we want to have a special bottle, we're always picking from the list that says wines we like. And that's as simple as it gets. It could be anything. There's nothing special about any given wine. Celebratory, we might grab a bottle of our bubbles. But it could be across the board.
So when you think back at all the advice that you've gotten over the years, and I know you're probably contrary in everything someone tells you, you do the opposite, but is there a piece of advice that you try to live your life by or work by that, whether it's for work or for life?
I wouldn't say it was ever, I wouldn't describe it necessarily as advice. I think it was more example. And I would probably hearken back actually to my grandmother, who grew up in the Dust Bowl and that's where my mom was raised, in the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma. And they had a wheat and cattle ranch back there that my brother and I used to go to every summer, which is where I learned to run tractors and farm and do all those things. But this woman had a work ethic like no other. And there was a contentness and a happiness that stemmed from being that active and that productive. And I think that's, in many respects, I kind of echo that in everything that we do. It's just, if you're idle, I think that there's something that's just from a either a spiritual or a mental or a physical standpoint, it's just not good for you. And I think that just that activity, productivity, creativity stems from doing things. And so I will continue to, as long as I possibly can, do things.
And if you could offer advice to our listeners, what kind of advice would you want to give to them?
About wine or about life?
That's your choice.
So about wine, don't take it too seriously, just enjoy it. And about life, stop and enjoy things. You don't have very many years on the face of this planet. 70 or 80 years might sound like a lot. It dawned on me as 2020 rolled around that the 1970s, which I remember vividly, are now half a century ago. And so I'm in the last third of my life. And so part of it is you stop and take measure as you go and learn to breathe.
So when you look back at all the years of work, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date in your work?
Probably I have lots of, I did so many different things throughout my career that there's lots of little snippets that were fun. I can remember being in Malaysia and launching a business there and giving a speech to probably 100 writers and TV people and doing the first 5 minutes in Bahasa and just blowing the crowd away just because nobody goes that long in their native language, which was fun.
I like that.
I remember brokering a deal in the Philippines with one of the Ayala subsidiaries and the American company I was working with, and being so dismayed at the American lawyers on my team that I got up, walked around the other side of the table and sat down with the Filipinos and said, okay, I'm on their side today, and negotiated against my own guys and put the deal together. And so there's just, it's that thinking about things differently and just going out. I have lots of little things like that.
So finish this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
It's Anita Bryant time, a day without sunshine.
So if sharing your wine is a special thing, and drinking wine is something you say to enjoy and enjoy with people. If there was one person from any walk of life, living or deceased, that you could have drinking native Flora, who would that be?
Probably Ben Franklin. Of all the people.
Because?
There was a breadth of knowledge and wisdom and kind of introspection and extrospection, if that's a word, that he applied to the whole world. And when you read things that he's written and you kind of get intimately acquainted with the things that he did, fabulous mind. It would be fun to pull somebody from that period of history and sit down and share a glass of wine.
I like that. Well, thank you for giving some thought to that. That was good. So when we first started talking, you mentioned some of the grapes you're planning to plant here. And Malbec was one of them, which you said doesn't ripen here. So
I didn't say that.
Okay, you didn't say that. That's true. But you said it's not typical here. But I'm curious where you think we're going to be in 500 years' time or beyond. Are we still going to be drinking wine? Making wine?
That's if we exist in 500 years. No, my time horizon from a prediction standpoint is maybe the rest of the century. I'm not going to try a 500-year shot. No, I think that we're seeing vast changes in our climate here locally. This winter is a perfect example of it. We're down on rainfall. Temperatures have been above average. I track data every year, and I have seen since 2012 anywhere from a 3 to 8% increase in total degree growing days, which is a measurement that we have in the vineyard. So the Malbec that you could never grow here, I now get ripe. It's the trick is not getting it ripe. The trick is getting it to set fruit in this climate. Figured out how to do that a number of years ago, and now I'm just going to pick a warmer site and put more of that in. I think that we've gone past the tipping point as far as climate change goes. And I think that there are going to be heavy prices to pay down there. I don't think it's the end of the world, but I think the next couple of generations behind me have got a lot of work to do, and I apologize. I've always tried to do this whole complex is geothermal.
Okay.
We have like 1 million gallons of rainwater storage on property so we never tap the aquifers. We've been very environmentally friendly. We treat the entire farm as like a single organism. And so everything participates, whether it's living or whether it's inanimate, everything has a role. Even the fish, the koi, the nitrates from the fish are used to water like all the flower beds and things like that. So it's a natural source of fertilizer. So all these pieces fit together in a very intimate way. And so we're good stewards of this little piece of dirt. And most of our peers and neighbors are very good stewards, but the vast majority of our nation is not.
So, on that sad note, if you were sent to a deserted island due to this lack of care that we put, what 3 wines would you take with you?
Oh, what a good question. That question is normally, what wine would you take? Okay, so I would take Pinot. I would take Riesling. What would I take as my third? Oh.
From particular places? Like Pinot from here or Pinot from Burgundy?
Pinot I make and Riesling I make. And I'd be good with those too. I could survive on those too.
You get one more.
I know, but it's that brings this conundrum in of trying to figure out a third that I would take. What would I take? Probably sparkling. Yeah.
So we always play a little game on Wine Soundtrack where we pair wine with music because, Wine Soundtrack, we have to have a little fun here. We've been having fun, but just a little more fun. With the wines that you were just talking about and some of your wines, I want you to tell me what kind of music it makes you think of listening to while you drink it, or what kind of energy it gives. So let's start with the wine we were drinking, your Pinot Gouge.
So Pinot Gouge. Oh, God, what would I be listening to? This would be more like Imagination Dragon or something like that. A little bangier.
Okay. You earlier mentioned your 2014 timepiece Pinot, sort of a next time, that sort of is a sense of the vintage, but of your place. What about that?
Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. Something from the 50s.
Okay. And your Riesling?
That's going to go to classical. Okay. That's going to be maybe a little Tchaikovsky, maybe Shostakovich. It's pulling Russian classical music into my head.
Okay. And your Jaguar Pinot?
Ooh, that's jazz. That's definite offbeat, syncopated, quiet, sultry, a little bit smoky jazz.
I could keep going with this. We could run through your whole lineup of wines. But we will. So I'm going to, as we get to the end, I'm going to ask you a question. Of all the places in the world producing wine, what's at the top of your bucket list to go explore next?
Oh, I want to get over to kind of Serbia, Herzegovina, kind of that just across the water from Italy. I want to go play in there and take a look around. I don't know that part of the world very well at all. And so that's probably next on my bucket list is places to go.
Ooh. Well, I know that you were planning a trip to Europe around this time, and I'm sure you're planning future travel. And if somebody wants to plan their travel here to Oregon, how can they come and visit you?
So super simple. 2 ways. Either give us a phone call or go onto our website, which is nativeflora.com, and you can actually book online. Take a look at kind of the rules and regs and timelines and things that we've got around here. We do not have an open tasting room, so people always, it's fun, you'll go to a party and they say, what do you do? And you say, I have a vineyard and winery. And they say, well, where at? And I go, Dundee Hills. And then everybody's ears perk up. And they go, do you have a tasting room? I go, yeah. And they go, when do you open? I go, never. And so it's the way we're designed from a business perspective. And I think the business of wine is something you haven't touched on, but it's something that's incredibly important, is that we're in the business of making and selling wine. And the people coming here are typically people that know wine well. They've done a little more homework. They've gotten past what they can read in magazines, and now they're really digging and trying to find the wines that they're going to love the rest of their lives. And that's really our clientele. It's a great spot to come and learn. It's a spot where only the owners pour. We don't have a tasting room staff, so Denise or I are the only 2 people that are pouring wines and talking about wines. Any question is a fair question. There are no dumb questions. It's an educational experience, but it's also a sensory experience too.
Well, Scott, I can't thank you enough for joining us today on Wine Soundtrack. I think that everyone who's out there wanting to learn more about wine, about Oregon wine, wants to visit the Dundee Hills, should definitely make an appointment here. It is definitely an experience, and the wines are worth it.
Thank you very much. It's been fun.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.